Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chad Lineweaver. I am on the board of the Morristown Festival of Books and also the director of the Morristown and Morris Township Library. Welcome to the Morristown Festival of Books at Home. Many of you joined us for today's first event, and we hope you enjoyed that conversation between David Michaelis and Bill Goldstein. And we're incredibly excited to bring you Victoria Schwab in our second session of today. As many of you know, the Morristown Festival of Books began in 2014, and our whole idea was to bring book lovers and authors together in engaging conversations about a wide range of topics. The great thing is that we've grown every single year. We've had more attendees, more authors, and more great discussions, but we could not do this without all of your support, the support of the publishing industry, and certainly the support of our sponsors. We want to take a second just to thank Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, the Community Foundation of New Jersey, Delta Dental, Investors Bank, Morris Arts, Red Hook Management Investment Advisors, and the William E. Simon Foundation for their generous support. While we all missed getting together this past October, this has given us an opportunity to share a virtual event and to gather an audience and authors across the globe. And in fact, Victoria is actually joining us today from France, so we're making this truly international today. But I'm really excited to present our moderator who will talk with Victoria today, which is New York Times bestselling author Dhonielle Clayton. Dhonielle is the author of the Bells series and is co-author with of the Tiny Pretty Things duology, which is now a Netflix original series, so you can catch that there. She taught elementary school for several years and is a former elementary and middle school librarian, which is one of our favorite things. But Ms. Clayton is also the COO of the nonprofit We Need Diverse Books. If you have not seen that or looked at the website, that's a fantastic place to go. Just hashtag We Need Diverse Books on Twitter. That's great. She's also the owner of Cake Literary, a creative story kitchen and IP content company. She runs the science fiction and fantasy book club, Black Girls with Magic and Books. I can keep going on, but I'm not going to. Dhonielle, I'm going to pass things over to you and have things get started. Thanks so much.
Awesome. I just listening to you read my bio, I'm like, oh boy, it's going to go on forever.
So fancy.
Oh my God. But I am so excited to see one of my closest friends. So everyone tuning in, this is Victoria V.E. Schwab, one of my besties, who I love and adore, who's very far away from me right now in France. The New York Times bestselling author of lots of books, Vicious and Vengeful, Our Savage Song, Our Dark Duet, The Near Witch, the Archive series, Your City of Ghosts trilogy. We'll be talking about the new one coming out as well. The Shades of Magic World and all of the comics. And you've got short stories like Fresh Kill, which is going to be turned into a TV show, which we're going to talk about. And we're going to first start with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So that is my Victoria, who is amazing. And I'm so excited to welcome all of these people watching into sort of our normal, because I just love that.
I was going to say, this is basically just we're pretending this is a one-on-one between the two of us. Dhonielle is one of my favorite people in the entire world. And normally, pandemic aside, we would probably be in the same place right now in Scotland or in France, because our favorite thing to do is go to some far-flung place with Zoraida Cordova and hunker down and write. So this is the longest time I haven't seen you in person in years.
I know. Victoria was the last person I saw before quarantine. So literally she was in New York in March and then had to flee home, flee back to Europe. And so I am missing you. So I'm so excited to do this today and to talk about this beautiful book, which is totally a piece of your heart, which I can feel it because I know you.
Yeah, definitely a close to the vest style project for many years. And now it just feels like I carved a piece of myself out and put it on paper. Sure, it's no problem. It's not overwhelming at all.
Exactly. And it leads me into my first sort of question for you, for us to discuss, is that I feel like all of your books leave behind breadcrumbs, pieces of yourself, fragments of bone and marrow and tissue of you. But this one in particular, I feel like ooh, I feel like you really took some things thematically that bother you and put them in this book. We're talking about the pain and anxiety of connections and misconnections, time and memory and legacy, immortality. And I want you to talk a little bit about how this is a beautiful stew of a lot of things that I think bother you, things that you're questioning and thinking about. And I want you to talk about all of that all of that went into this beautiful book.
Well, and so you and I talk a lot about the idea of what drives us to tell stories. And I know a lot of people will be like, I still feel like I'm in high school, or, I want to speak to this part of myself. But I feel like you and I have both been driven a lot by anger, like anger at what we see and at what we don't see. And so I think in a lot of ways, yes, this was a narrative that kind of sunk its teeth into me over the course of many years, but the driving force behind it was an idea of what it means, the difference between loneliness and being alone, how to be comfortable in your own skin, how to take up space in the world, how to leave your mark. I mean, a lot of it has to do with creativity. As a writer, this concept that feels like we're only relevant through the product we create, and our self-worth and our work becomes just completely inextricably tied together. There's the idea of like, I'm the kind of person who likes to be alone. Yeah. But that's in part, I think, because I see myself so continually reflected in other people through my community and through my family and through readership. And so this is an examination of who are we when we don't have any of those pieces. And perhaps the most personal element was in Henry's character, in the third character, where I wanted to explore mental health. I wanted to take like a very serious look at kind of I don't want to say the millennial crisis, but like millennials, we get such a bad rap. Like we get so reductively assessed. And when we look at like this extreme drive to have purpose in our lives, this extreme drive to be successful, to, impress our parents, to live up to some weird rationale, and you intersect that with somebody struggling with mental health, with exceptionalism culture, with this fear that we have, where we have like a prolonged childhood, but at the same time, we're told like, figure it out right now. Like we jump from being like infantilized 18-year-olds into 19 and 20. And suddenly you're told like, what do you mean you haven't had it all figured out your entire life, what exactly you want to do? And so Henry was such a deeply personal character in terms of assessing what happens when you just feel lost inside your own life. So it was really, you're right, it's about fear of the unknown, fear of time, fear of like mortality, which I feel like creators, we feel fear of irrelevance, fear of everything. And so weirdly, even though this is a book about art, for me, it was a book about fear, including the fear of putting it down on paper.
Right, because you've talked a lot about how long this took you, and everyone asks you that question. And I know you've lived with this story for a long time because you told me about it years ago. Yeah. And you were like, I'm circling it and circling it and circling it. And like, you're dabbling in all your other worlds. You're in your Shades of Magic world. You're doing your dark fairy tales, like you're doing your thing. But this is the book that has haunted you.
Because I was afraid, right? Like we have stories, like I think it was Melissa Delacruz several years ago saying that we as creators usually have one story that we're circling over and over again, figuring out different ways to tell it. And I think that's true. But at the same time, I think sometimes we get a story that we know we can only tell once.
Yeah.
And for me, this was that story. And I remember telling you about it years ago. I remember telling my editor, Miriam Weinberg, about it like in 2013, 14, and it had already been with me for a couple of years. And what happened was over time, I became so deeply afraid of imperfection. Yep. So afraid of trying to tell a story and not doing it justice that I fell into the age-old trap of deciding I wasn't going to write it at all, because why create a thing if you can't do it perfectly? And the fallacy there, right, is that there's no perfection in any form of art.
That's so funny because remember, I was texting her yesterday, having a meltdown about making my new story that I'm working on perfect. And she gave me the kick in the pants that I needed and I think it's because you learned with Addie, like you just have to write it. And that's what you did. And I'm like, I need this to be perfect. So I got stuck. And I didn't write for several hours, and I wallowed and drank whiskey and like whined, right?
Which I'm not trying to discount that process at all. I think that's a beautiful process, but I do think, weirdly, it's this, I don't know if you feel the same way. I'm really curious to hear, which I feel like the more books I write, the harder that hill becomes, because we become increasingly aware of the shortcomings, even though we know we have to create raw clay before we can sculpt it.
And I just think, oh God, and I kind of want to rewrite my other books, and then I don't want to look at them. And I'm like, oh, I need to do this again. I need to do this over. And I keep doing this. And we have our little ticks, right? We have the things that we love to do over and over again. And I'm like, oh no, they're going to slam me for this. And it's all this noise.
I'm like, I've started to, I think I come to peace with my tics, and then I get nervous all over again. So I'm writing a novel now, and like, I know something I've gotten slammed for, but it's also just a part of my storytelling, is that the first third of my novels are always slow.
Yeah, same.
And but I do that because the way I like to think of it is that I'm setting a chessboard.
Yep.
And then the second third of the novel, we're playing the game of chess, and the third third is the payoff. And so like, but I need to set the board. And for years I felt terribly guilty because almost all of my bad reviews were like, start slow. And I hit a point where I was like, you know what?
Yep.
Like, I start slow. Okay. Like, that's going to be the game, because like the goal is that I bet you that most of the time when you finish one of my books, the payoff,
Yep.
you're going to feel more invested in the ending because I spent that time at the beginning.
And I love that, because I remember when we were talking, this was one time when we were probably in Scotland, we talked about how you want the first bite of your novel and the last bite to be memorable, like a great plate of food. You always remember that first bite, and then you remember the last bite. And I kept thinking about it because, you know, I'm shit at endings. So, and you always start at the end and go backwards. And I'm trying to, I hear her in my head, y'all, say, you better know your ending. Why are we playing? Why are we even starting this?
My infamy in the industry is walking up to every single person being like, I'm sorry, do you know how it ends? Do you know how it ends? You need to know how it ends. But I know it's like, not to say like, yes, I will tell you that every day until I die, because I think that having an ending that excites you is a deeply empowering process. And for those of us who are constantly on the verge of just trashing whatever we have, it keeps us going. But it's also just because I cannot fathom not having an ending, because I know if I didn't have one, I would quit. I would just be like, I'm moving to Iceland, gonna raise goats, bye-bye.
I'm out of here. And that's what I'm wondering, when you were thinking about the end of Addie, without any spoilers.
Yeah, no spoilers, don't worry.
Also, just knowing that this is such a penultimate thing for you, to know the end of that book must have been really difficult to also push through to write it.
So first of all, it took years. And for anyone who doesn't believe me, like, I have had books be months, if not years late, because I have not had the ending, and I won't start writing the book without the ending. Addie was such an interesting problem because, okay, I had the idea when I was 22, 23, and I was a very different person. And I mean, like, I didn't even come out until I was 28. So like, I did not know myself. You can read my books and it is obvious that I am processing that on a subliminal level, but like, I wasn't transparent to myself in that way. But if I had written the ending that I had for the book when I was 25,
imagine
a 33-year-old me is like, you just fail. Like, it was not the right ending, but it's the only ending that I would have had at 25, because I just didn't have it wouldn't have had the right agency. It wouldn't have had like the winners would have been like, and so it wasn't until I was about 29, 30 when I had enough maturity to realize the ending that I needed for myself, for the story, the ending that I could live with for the narrative. But thank God, like, I believe we write stories at the time that we need to write them, hopefully, if we don't rush them, because I also didn't want this novel to be the product of when I was 40, because the issues would be different. This is a novel about the fallacy of adulthood and the fear of age. And I feel like that is such a late 20s fear of like, what do you mean I'm supposed to know what I'm doing? But yeah, the ending, 5 to 6 years. And I remember the day I came up with the ending that would stick, and I just thought, oh, thank God.
Right.
Now I can write it. Now I can write it.
I feel like this is a book that thickens, right? Like, and it has to keep thickening until you're ready to like consume it.
And I want to ask you about this, because like, I went back and I have like 10 years of notes for this book, but I never let myself go back and use any of them. I could read them, but I couldn't take scraps. I had to just write as I was at 31, 32. But like, there are a few things that never made it in the books. And yet, okay, to continue our food metaphor, they're like bay leaves.
Okay.
Like, they seasoned it. They were so important, but I had to take them out right before you eat the meal. Like, you don't want it in the actual food. There are whole elements of Luke's character, like in the bay leaf of him, was that every time he saw her throughout history, he recited one line of a romance poem.
You took that out?
Starting with, come away with me and be my love. And like, I took it out, but it informed and flavored so much of him, because all I had to think when I sat down to write Luke was, come away with me and be my love. It's not a question, it's a command.
It is.
It's a beautiful line, but there is
Arrogant.
something arrogant.
Arrogant. And I love it. And let's talk about that darkness. Because something that I love about your work that you just are like me too, where it's like you love a good villain, you love the dark, you go into the dark, you love a good bargain. All of your books have this flirting and bargain with the dark. It's a thread through your work.
Oh, yeah. Death and darkness and evil are like, I went back and I looked through my 20 books and I was like, what's the common thread here? Surely there's something. It's like, oh, death. Death and like immortality and versions of villainy or the devil in every single book.
Your work. I identified 2 threads, and this is the first one we're going to talk about. Just this flirtation with the thing, the dark thing, the bargain, the thing we're not supposed to do, the thing we're not supposed to feel. And I think it's one of my favorite things about you is because I know that I can tell you the thing that is not what I'm supposed to be doing or thinking or feeling. And you're like, oh, that's okay. You know what I mean? Like I can tell you the worst thing that I'm thinking or the worst thing about me, thing I want to write. And it's like,
but those are the things our characters need. And like, I get asked a lot about writing antiheroes and villains. And it's just that when we as readers, when we connect with characters that we're reading, we don't connect with their strengths. We connect with their weaknesses. We never read a character and be like, that character is a badass who's in control of her life. I feel like that. We were like, that person has been slighted and wants revenge on an ex. I have felt that way. So I'm fascinated by the cracks in our armor as people. And I think especially when writing women, because I think there's this thing that happens, especially in fantasy or supernatural fiction, when a female character is given power, they are expected to not want it and to be self-sacrificing about it, to be willing to just surrender everything for the greater good. And I don't know about you, but like this started with in YA when I was writing YA, which was that like 17-year-old me would have burned the world down to be happy. There was none of this like, well, I have this incredible world-changing power. I think I'll just sacrifice myself and make everyone else happy and I'll be miserable. I was like, screw that. Like,
burn it all. And thank God we didn't know each other at 17 and went to the same school, because we would have been the 2 anti-heroes.
It would have been, it's the Craft, like retelling. Like,
exactly.
But it's true. But I specifically think about it as it relates to autonomy, agency, and ambition. Because I think those are the things women are told not to have. So specifically, like we can make male characters dynamic. It's easy because it's how we're coded to default to like, oh, male characters get to have complexity. And we can talk about it as terms of like straight and queer identity as well, because like queer characters will always be reduced to their sexuality in the way straight people want. Black people will always be really reduced to their race in the way white people want. Like there are these binaries, but like, so for women, I specifically look to how can I have them own the ambition of what they want?
And you love a good ambitious girl, which I love, because the ambition always, like, it's the cat that burns their whiskers, but still will go see the thing. And I love that because I'm that kind of person.
I was gonna say, you were gonna say were, and I was like, I'm not sure.
Don't burn my whiskers. I am. And that's why I think that the 2 of us have worked really well together, wildly ambitious.
Yes.
And I have never met anyone besides it's you and Zoraida Cordova that have a work ethic that is like, we are 3 little workhorses that are like, we just want.
I mean, it's hunger, right? And weirdly, to relate it back to Addie, it's a desire to take up space and carve out space. So I have a tattoo. You don't know about this one. I have a tattoo that basically is Latin and it translates to either find a way or make your own. And that's the thing, right? It's like, I will make space. I was told early on in my career, like not to take up space. I was told that essentially I didn't deserve to have space. I was told that like, I should go be quiet. I should settle down. I should find a lane. And I don't know about, I mean, I know about you. We're the same person where I was like, oh, really? Like spite is a beautiful thing. Like, allow me to light that flame of my career with your disregard.
And I love that because it's also something we're told we're not supposed to do. It's not nice. It's not feminine. And it's like, oh, the spite fuels my oven and I will turn it on and I will keep it on forever. And I love that because with Addie needing and desiring to take up space, to be remembered, I mean, just that I remember you. The fact that those three little words are like the biggest things ever in the book, they're so loud. I feel like everyone's saying that this book is your love letter to art. And I think it's a love letter to power.
Yeah.
And that art is power, but I think something in your work that I want you to talk about is this power, this infatuation, this love of it, because I find.
And this is the weird thing is I see a lot of people, I think a lot of people misunderstand Addie, and maybe that's my fault, but like I never have seen Addie as a hero.
Right.
Like Addie is a deeply selfish and self-absorbed person because for 300 years she has a universe of one. And I feel like the only way she's been able to survive and maintain a semblance of sanity is to be self-absorbed. But what Addie realizes is like the difference is Addie wants power in that she wants to be remembered. She doesn't have ego in that she doesn't want credit. She just wants to take up space. She's fine being power behind thrones. She's fine being the hand that guides the art. She's fine with being a muse because what she cares about most is air. She wants to breathe. She is a fire, like in that way of desiring more oxygen. And so not to say anything about the ending, but like I would argue that Addie is an extremely calculating woman.
Absolutely. I don't think you can survive without a level of calculation. And I think it's reductive to think that she would not need to be. I think that sometimes, again, people want women to be written in a very particular way. And so when those are the soft spots of the armor or the selfishness comes up, I don't want to think about women that way. So we don't like Addie because she's selfish. No, she's actually how a lot of people are.
And also I think you have to remember that Luke, who we call him the devil for marketing purposes, he's not, he's an old god.
Right.
Luke sees an equal in her, and that should tell you something. Like he does not admire her softness. There is nothing soft. I mean, she has a lot of artistic beauty, and she has a lot of hedonism and desire for just like the fineries of life. But like, he does not look at Addie and find his equal in her kindness. He looks at Addie and finds his equal in her hunger.
Right. And I think that that's something that is so refreshing, because there is a way that you could have written Addie as this sort of waif-like immortal who's trying to find someone to remember her beloved, blah, blah, blah. But no, she wants what she wants. And there's a particular reason why. And that's why I find her very, very attractive, and as a character, as like I want to meet her. And then I keep thinking about, and this is a question I have for you, if you were to make a Faustian bargain like this, I'm wondering what the immortal Victoria Schwab would have been up to.
Everything.
I know.
I mean, so like it's weird because I get asked this question all the time, like, would you do the deal? And I'm like, in a heartbeat. Like I think it's unfortunate, the forgetting element, because I think that the most painful thing to write, for instance, was and this is not a spoiler because it happens in like the first 2 chapters, is her parents forgetting her.
Yes.
Because it's one thing to be erased from the future. It's another thing to have your past erased as well. And I think that's something we see in a lot of these immortality narratives, is like you go into the narrative understanding that everyone you love will die. And when they die, their memory of you will die too. And I think about this seems like a non sequitur, but I swear, which is that I visited a graveyard, I believe in Oslo, Norway, where I found out that like the rule for this graveyard, because there were a limited number of plots, is that you could hold your plot as long as somebody was alive to mourn you.
Oh, wow.
And I think about that in terms of immortality. Immortality is having somebody alive to carry your memory. Right. And so like Addie moving forward, she would have already as an immortal lost people along the way, but to also go back and erase the people she has lived with for 23 years, that to me was the most painful part. And I think that would be difficult, but I wouldn't have written a novel like this if I didn't deeply, deeply desire more time.
Yes, more time. And I thought about all of the trouble I would have probably gotten myself into, and how it's death by paper cut to be forgotten. where it becomes an infected wound over time and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And you think it's not that bad at first, right?
Yeah. I mean, that happens. I mean, she probably meets Remy, her first love,
Mhm.
like 30 years in, 40 years in. Actually, no, sorry. It's like 20, 25 years in, but still, like, she's already been getting those paper cuts accruing, and yet she is such a relentless optimist, which is, I think, a thing we confuse with like softness, but no, she's just relentlessly optimistic because that's all she has to hold on to is a belief that somehow she's going to find a way to widen the cracks in this curse. But she's such a relentless optimist that 300 years later in the first chapter, when we meet her with Toby, she is going to bed, some small part of her hoping that she is going to wake up and he is going to look at her and say good morning instead of who are you.
And the Victoria Schwab book means it's who are you? Because it's like, you can't just do the immortal. It has to be, the bargain has to be deeper.
Yeah.
And it has to be cruel. There's a cruelty.
Do you ever think, though, there sometimes just might be like, I mean, this is just the relentless, anxious version of me who is so scared of losing the ones I love because I worry I wouldn't be a human without them. But do you think there's some part that would just be deeply relieved to not have to worry about love, like being cared about and caring about?
Because then you can experience loss, right? And
It's
to not experience loss is at a bit of freedom. But then it's like,
mean, there are times when I've been, and I think this ties into mental health, but there are times when you're at your lowest, right? When that storm is darkest, as Henry would put it, where you just think like, would it be an incredible freedom to not have anybody to have those feelings about? Because I know that saying is like, it's better to love and lose than never love at all. But some days you're like, is
it right? Like, do I want this pain? Do I want this?
I don't know. I mean, obviously it's something that I think about a lot as a human, and then as a creator, is those sacrifices. And like, when is it a mercy? Is it a mercy because it's a mercy that we only use to justify the pain? I don't know. Like, it's a thing, the deal of it and the loss of it is a thing I think about a lot.
Right. And it's something that shows up in all of your work, which is a bridge to all of
death, coming back from death again.
Exactly. And it's you grappling with your mortality, you grappling with your legacy, being a writer, the things that we're leaving behind, who we are, our beloveds. And you've been able to write these things, and power, thinking about power mixed in with all of those through lots of things, right? Like your Shades of Magic world, you've got your Near Witch, you've got also a middle grade coming.
And about death. Shockingly about death.
Right. And I want you to talk about it. I want you to talk about these are the things that you circle, but you land in different age categories, in different ways.
Okay, so what I would say is that, like, in case it's not obvious, it's obvious to you, but to anyone watching, I grew up with a deep-seated fear of mortality. Never my own, but those that I cared about. Like, just, I would lie awake at night and I would have like anxiety spirals about losing my loved ones. Yeah. And I still do, but it's less frequent. But it got me thinking, like, so often, most of the time when we begin as writers, it's a form of catharsis. We are trying to exorcise and analyze something inside of us. And because I had this deep fear of mortality, what I was really afraid of was the loss. And not the loss of the manifested person, though that was part of it. I was afraid of the loss of everything that person had been. Yeah. Every piece of information, every experience. And so that led to The Archived, which was one of my first books, which was about a library where the dead are shelved in bodies instead of books. And so essentially was my answer to my own fear. Mm-hmm. So, okay, I have a fear that when you die, every word you've learned, every book you've read, all of these things, they dissolve. That's my fear.
The shape of them.
Exactly. And so I will preserve a person. That's what I would do. And then as I wrote more books, I circled this idea again and again. It would come up in different ways. So I would look at the porousness of mortality. Vicious. Can a person die and come back from that edge? You know, and City of Ghosts, the latest book, Bridge of Souls, which is out in 9 days, which is so strange to think about. This series is about a girl who drowns and the boy who brings her back to life, and the boy who brings her back to life is a ghost. And so when he pulls her back into the land of the living, she pulls him out of the land of the dead, and now they're tethered together, and she can see spirits. And there's a television show called The Inspectors, and it's a lot of fun, but really at its heart is about the boundary between life and death, and the fact that I find it incredibly comforting to examine ways in which life is either prolonged, like with Addie, or death is averted.
Right. Bested.
Yeah. In
And
all of my books, literally all of them. I mean, Kellen Rye in the Shades of Magic series, literally a resurrection and a life force binding two people together.
And it's so interesting to see how these deep questions, these worries, these anxieties just keep showing up. And I think that even when you're an 80-year-old woman and we're in France having tea, it'll be a thing where you're still like, you know what? I'm gonna work on a short story that blah blah blah, because
I just can't help it. I mean, like, it's just a thing. The thing is, I obsess over it every day of my normal life. And so writing about it is just a catharsis. It's just a way for me to explore and say, how can I mitigate my own fear, my own grief, my own need, my own longing? And one of those central narratives is through subverting death.
and it's interesting to see the different versions of you and this worry and anxiety in each piece of your work, because it represents another part of, like, I can see what Victoria's worried about, what 22-year-old Victoria or 23 or 25 or 28, it's interesting to be able to look back on your work and be like, damn, what was going on?
It's like tracing paper, right? I feel like there's two ways you can lay tracing paper over my books. One is death and one is sexuality.
Yes.
Because these were two elements I was trying to come to terms with through fiction, and feeling like, back to the Near Witch, a girl who does not feel at home in her village, like, who is an insider, who is born and raised here, and just doesn't feel like she fits. And then through to Lila Bard, a character who doesn't feel at home in her world, to August, a character who doesn't feel at home in his skin, to each of these things, of me just trying to examine, like, insider outsider culture, not only along the axis of born on the outside trying to come in, but on the axis of born inside trying to get out.
And it's so interesting how we can escape these things. And I don't know how much, when you sit down to write, I know you have a new YA coming as well, which we've talked about, how much you think it through first, or how much it comes subconsciously. Because I'm finding that people are finding things in my work and I'm like, oh shoot, like, I feel like I've been exposed because I didn't even realize that it was.
You're like, no, I totally did that on purpose. That was meant to be there. No, theme for me is not a thing I sit down with. Like, theme is a thing that comes out. Like, I sit down with plot and character. I never sit down and think, oh, like the motifs and the morals, like the message from this story is going to feel like I just never do. So what's weird and trippy, as you say, is to go back and look at the book once it's done and be like, oh wow. Like, I mean, I just don't, like, I don't go in with that in mind. I'm just not that kind of writer. I go in with questions. Yes. And usually I go in with, as we talked about in the beginning, like a point of anger. Like one thing about Addie LaRue that we don't talk about a lot, but I think is really important, is casual queerness through the book. Because I had this, and anger is not even the right word, but like, as somebody who didn't come out as a teenager, I don't actually need a coming out narrative. What I need is a queer existence narrative. Like, I want to see queer characters taking up space on the page and have it not be part of the plot. Like, sexuality and identity don't need to be plot points. They can be in coming out narratives, and those are super important. But like, I was just like, hey man, could we just have some just queer people in the books and just let them be queer and doing their own thing, and have that be obviously an important part of their narrative. But I think comes down to the fact that, like, for me, my sexuality is probably 10% of who I am.
Right.
Like, not 95. And for others, it's going to be everywhere along that spectrum. But for me, what I desperately wanted, I was like, I'm not sure I believe in straightness. Like, I'm sure straight people exist, but like, I'm pretty sure that spectrum is real wide.
It's so radical when you think about the casualness, like that. It's just part of the fabric, because our society and the way that things work, we want that to be the thing that leads. That's the card you play. That's the banner that you're flying. And sometimes we need those books, but we also need books where it's like, oh, that's a part of them, just like they have curly hair or
Exactly.
bright green eyes, or they're scared of the dark or have a dog, right? It can also just be part of the fabric of them.
It can be informative without defining, right? Because like I do think sometimes there's so much pressure, and I feel it now, especially like now that I'm out, people will be like, well, how gay is your future? Like, how gay is your next book? And I'm like, well, I mean, it's gay in that I wrote it, and like therefore kind of can't, that's inextricable, but like there's this pressure now of like, if I don't make a story about that, then I get blowback, because they're like, no, but you need to make a story about that to represent. And I'm like, okay, but that in itself is very limiting. I just want to be. Can I just be on the paper and not have it be about that?
I know, and I wish there was a different way that we can always just integrate the things that we want to integrate into our worlds in a way that feels reflective of where we're at with our spirit, and where we're at with what we're worried about. But because of the way that it goes, we become these representatives, and our work becomes a representative. And you're like, I just want to create what I'm creating without all of that. And it is frustrating. And I'm hoping that we can get to the point where there's so much really good representation that we can just be.
Yeah. Oh, get me to the point where we can have like queer villains.
Yes.
Because this whole idea of like, we are still in such a dearth of representation, and like it's getting better, right? But still a dearth, to the point where when a character of a marginalization does exist on the page, they're held to such a high standard of character, to the point where if you make them flawed, you're accused of making a commentary on all people of that marginalization. You're like, guess what? Like, we are not monolithic.
No.
Like this is an individual human experience.
Exactly.
And so I will be very excited to get to the point where we can have a spectrum of characters of marginalization, so that we can have actual representation happening instead of the illusion of representation through this kind of pedestaling.
And the pedestaling, it just boxes us all in. And this leads to my last question before we open up to the audience, because I know you all have a lot of questions. Is, can you tell us a little bit about First Kill? And
yeah,
I think we're dealing with death, so it does parallel the current work.
Okay, so just I'm not supposed to say very much about it right now. So what I will say is that First Kill, which was a short story written for Vampires Never Get Old, that Zoraida Cordova edited with Natalie Parker, is a story about a teenage girl who happens to be a vampire, and she has a crush on the new girl at her school, and she ends up with her at a house party, and she goes and decides this girl's going to be her first kill. She has to bite somebody, and she has a crush on this girl, so she's going to be her first kill. And she goes to bite the girl and learns the hard way that her crush is a vampire hunter. So it's like a very archetypal Juliet and Juliet story. And we've just finished writing the first season, and it's going into pre-production at Netflix in like a couple weeks, which is terrifying. But I'm really excited because, again, like it's diverse in ways that just I find deeply, deeply exciting. It's refreshing. Like as somebody who grew up with Buffy and Crumbs and being like, yes, Willow, I will take you. Not that there was anything wrong with Willow, but like it'll be nice to just have something that I helped make that is what 16-year-old me, like maybe if I had seen this kind of casual representation, it wouldn't have taken me an extra 15 years.
Oh, for sure. I would be a different person had I had that. Yeah. I would be, yes, completely different. And to be able to see again, it's also power. It's a power struggle between two girls, and also all of the tension between them. I'm here for it. I can't wait. And if you all want to taste, go ahead and get the collection, Vampires Never Get Old. I also have a short story that comes right before Victoria's. They put us at the back of the book, me and you together, the caboose.
They always know. It's us at the back of the class, Dhonielle. They're just always being like, those ones we're going to talk, put them in the corner.
It's true. We would have been in so much trouble had we gone to school. Thank goodness. And my mom and your mom are very similar. That's why I love it so much, where I'm like, oh, your mom would be calling my mom being like, those two again. we have to go to the principal's office
We
together.
would always be in the principal's office.
Yes, exactly. Just troublesome. And so we're going to take a few questions from the audience.
Also, I picked this shirt and I don't know why I picked it because all it does is move. Like I'm trying to like sit on this shirt to keep it from moving. Like it'll come up to my throat. It'll like go off one side.
I like it. I wore stars for you for Addie. Yeah. And so I think we're getting help from the moderator with that. Otherwise,
yes. So we have a ton of questions, ton of great questions. We won't be able to get to them all, but we can definitely try. Allison asks, how long did it take you to plan Addie LaRue? And what was your planning process like? And I guess it's a three-pronged question. How much did the book change after you started writing along with that process?
1,000 years.
So it took 10 years from start to finish, but a lot of that was thinking time and working time. I am Dhonielle knows this, a pretty strict outliner. So weirdly, Addie LaRue is like 300 pieces, 300 components. I would plan every single component into like tiny blocks of text. Like this scene needs to have this, and it would just all have to fit into this text. And then I would rearrange them until I found the pattern. And then I would write the entire book out of order. So I would write the book based on what emotionally I could handle that day. So there were like, sex scenes, adventure, drama, fear, and I would pick what I was emotionally equipped to draft that day. So the writing process took probably about 18 months once I actually started putting pen to paper. And the thing that's interesting is that Luke's character changed completely from beginning to end.
I remember you had cards because we were in Scotland and she had all of these little cards with the little snatches of scenes, and she was like a little wizard, like moving around and like getting stressed. And I'm working and I'm looking at her move these things around. I'm like, what's happening over there with this wizardry? Like,
yes. And I do that with every book. Like I put it all the pieces out because I like to braid narratives and I like to figure out structurally how I can be ambitious. But yeah, and Luke, the only way that Luke changed is that he started out as a really ephemeral, kind of very classic God figure. And then I realized, oh no, I want you to be a petulant child. And that's what I made him.
I love him and I'm into him. But I'm into the darkness. so yeah.
That leads really well into Brianna's question. How did you decide what that order was in order to deliver the information in Addie? Because it's not told chronologically.
No, it's not told chronologically at all.
To the monster that is Victoria Schwab.
I was gonna say, someone asked me today, like, is it all visual? And I was like, unfortunately, most of the time it's just happening in my head. What I would say is I tend to like braiding past and present. And I knew that Addie's narrative was one that happened over the course of 300 years and over the course of a single year in New York City. So I essentially treated those as the two braids of the narrative and figure out how to weave past and present together. The complicating factor was Henry. There are whole iterations of the book where Henry's narrative is stretched out through. And in the final version, he's part 4. So he got kind of grouped. And so my editor and I, Miriam and I, tried so many different iterations before realizing, like, I think we just need a divergent path where we take like an interlude. If anyone's watching WandaVision, it's that like we interrupt this program episode to be like, let's just slash cut to Henry's story. But there really was no easy way to weave him in.
And Miriam Weinberg, who is like the best, your editor, was like stressing you to the max.
My editor was like, hello, would you like to turn your book in now? It's like 8 years late.
Emily asked, how do I word this? I always wanted to know if you always meant to include the point of view of both Henry and Addie.
Oh yeah.
Yes. I wasn't sure how much space Henry would take up, but the more I wrote him, the more I wrote him. Like originally I was like, maybe it'll just be an interlude. And then I was like, oh, because the thing is, we as people see ourselves through our reflections in others. And without Henry, there was no way for Addie to be seen through any other lens. There was no way for us as the reader to see Addie from somebody else's perspective, because I knew I didn't want to give Luke a perspective. And so really that was our only way to get out of Addie's head and see her as somebody else saw her. And I think that was deeply important for her character.
On a bit of a different note, how did you research the different locations that Addie visited throughout her journey?
Over the course of 10 years. And that's the thing people don't realize is I got the idea for Addie LaRue before my first novel, The Near Witch, came out. And it became, and Addie LaRue is my 20th book. So for 20 books, everywhere I went for research or on tour, every country, every city, I had this passenger. I had Addie sitting at my side, and I would ask myself, okay, you're in this city and you have one paragraph to describe it. What details do you choose? Like, I knew that those interstitials were going to be short. And so I have many places that I visited that never made it into the book that I feel are pieces of Addie's flashbacks that just didn't have space. But yeah, I would carry her with me everywhere. And everywhere I went, I just thought, how would Addie live or exist or move through this space?
Which leads into another great question from Maya. How do your stories or worlds typically change as you write them?
The stories change, the worlds don't. Dhonielle knows this. I plan worlds in advance because I think, okay, this is such a weird way to think about it. And I haven't said this in a while. So let's see if I can say it and have it make sense, which is that I write primarily about outsiders. And in order to write about outsiders, I have to understand insiders. In order to understand insiders, I have to understand the world that they fit cleanly in. So the world actually tends to be the very first thing that I structure so that I can figure how to juxtapose my characters to that world. The rules of the world, they'll get fleshed out, but they don't change once I have them in place because everything else is riding on them.
Lisa asks, are you fluent in French?
I can hear my father next door being like, no, she is not, but she doesn't take the time. I don't have fluency. No, I used to be much, much closer than I am now. It's very shameful as somebody who has lived here, albeit in lockdown for 11 months now, but it's difficult to achieve fluency in a language for me if I'm not speaking and thinking it all day, every day. And I work in English. So that's going to be my excuse. I'm going to sit with that excuse because I'm terrible at language, but I'm pretty good at reading and hearing French. If I can have conversations where they're speaking French and I'm speaking English, like that's my perfect conversation.
And I've seen you do it. You're very good at it. You can make phone calls, you can do these things. And versus me, I'm like, huh?
That's the goal. Dhonielle is much more proficient in French than I
am. Somebody asked, which character was the most comfortable for you to write?
Oh, comfortable.
I'm like,
I don't think I have comfortable.
For all of these characters, I'm like, you were dying. You were dying.
Characters kill me. Characters are brutal. I mean, I have to look back like several books to find a character that was Lila Bard is comfortable to write from Shades of Magic because I know what she's going to do. Nobody in Addie LaRue, maybe Luke. Luke was probably the closest thing to comfort, but I don't really get comfortable with my characters.
Well, somebody else asked, what is it that's important to you when you're creating a character?
Look at me trying to adjust that shirt again. Why do I do that? I build characters out of 3 things. So literally I build all of my characters from a tripod. One is what they fear, one is what they want, and one is what they're willing to do to get what they want. And from those 3 prongs, I can basically create a mantra for a character. And then from there, I can figure out what their stress point is to break their own mantra.
And this is why you create characters that go to the dark side.
Exactly. Because I know how far they will go.
You know what they will do. No, it's such a great way. I always think about also bruises.
Yes.
What is the bruise that when I press it will cause a reaction of epic proportion? To know that.
Exactly, because I feel like as much armor as our characters might put on, there's always going to be a stress point. There's always going to be I'd not even call it a weakness. I think you're right. I think bruise is such a better way to put it.
Yeah. And you always press the bruises.
Yeah.
Michelle asks, is there a character in Addie LaRue that you found to be distant from your experience? And when that happens, how do you approach them?
I mean, I'm not 300 years old and I'm not a devil. So no, but I think this gets to an interesting point, which is that there is a fallacy that we as creators, that our characters are stand-ins for us.
Right.
And that is deeply untrue. I think I have 2 or 3 characters out of 50 to 60 characters now that I feel close to. Victor Vale in Vicious was an autobiographical character. Lila Bard in Shades of Magic, August Flynn in This Savage Song, and then Henry Strauss in Addie LaRue. Everyone else there's very little of my experience in them. I break off a tiny piece of my personality and then I create a new person from it, which sounds just as narcissistic as it is.
But that's what we do. That's what we do.
But I don't know. I feel like all of their experiences diverge from mine. I don't want to write memoir. Like I want to write people who are weaker or stronger than me, who have different strengths, who, like, this is the thing about Addie. Addie is, as I said, a relentless optimist. I am not.
Yeah.
Like, she is about stubborn hope and defiant joy. I am not. So in that way, it was refreshing to write a character so different from myself, but I have no illusions about like the similarities.
This is very off topic, but I love the question. It's from Iris. How did you and Dhonielle meet? You seem as if you were separated at birth.
Oh, it's the best compliment ever. Dhonielle, I don't even remember. We have known each other for like 8, 9 years now.
Right. I feel like we had met at like an event because we were both at a party, but then we were at like a madcap retreat, and I think we stayed in the same cabin, and I was like, oh, that's my girl. Like, because we were both equally just like,
you mean we were drinking wine and sitting in the corner being like the 85-year-old men that we are, then yes.
Indeed.
I mean, this is the thing, maybe this is the better way to put it, is like, the longer you're in a creative field, the more you find your home, like your people. And I think that for better or worse, the longer you're in a creative field, the more that circle shrinks, but you distill down your heart people that you're just like, oh, you're my ride or die. Like, I will go to bat. Like, I know you, like, you'll be the first person I think of when I see something funny. You'll be the first person I think of when I see something that just pisses me off and I want to talk to someone. Like, I think sometimes you just meet people and it feels like you've known them a lot longer than you have.
Yeah. And I definitely think that it's like, oh, I was like, this is like my sister. Like, I've known her forever, and we're just devilish in the best ways. We like good food and good whiskey and good wine. And like, we just have a meeting of hearts and souls and petty bones. And it's just like,
and spite and ambition. And like, when you see somebody who is working as hard as you are, like, I have deep respect for that. Like, my biggest turnoff in life is apathy. And when I find friends who are as hungry and are just like, are giving it their 100% heart, then that just makes me want to, like, I want to sit in that light.
And Victoria Schwab makes a mean roast chicken.
I do
have to say. So like, every time I'm like, oh, is V gonna make the chicken? Like,
yeah, bring the whiskey. I will make the chicken. We will talk about story.
That's us.
A lot of readers have been asking, what are some of your favorite books? What are you reading now? Favorite authors? And I would love for Dhonielle to chime in as well.
Sure.
Yes. Dhonielle, go first.
One of the books that I read right now, I'm like looking around because they're like everywhere, that I'm excited about is The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. Dark, West African Handmaid's Tale, really good, really, really good. Another book coming up is Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart. She's a UK author, and it's just like Jamaican witches. Trust no witch, be prepared. Like, it's scary. Our favorite boo, Zoraida Cordova, has an adult book coming out called The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, which is very good and messed up, like Stardust and Night Circus and all in the Latinx magical realism. So those are 3 right now that are top of mind that I've read, or that I am currently reading that I'm loving.
I talk on the witch train. Yeah, Zoraida's is next on my list, and I can't wait. It's my reward for finishing the revision that I'm on. I just read a book called Bad Witch Burning.
Yes, so good.
Such a delight. Like, such an incredible, I read it in a single day. I could not stop reading it. So that's coming out very soon. I'm that person who also reads things that came out years ago. So I'm also finally reading Pachinko, which I'm just late to every single party. I'm on like a weird kick this year. I don't know if it's because I'm working so much that I'm deeply voracious. So I am consuming story at just an insane rate. I also am one of the judges for the audiobook awards, and have gotten to listen to just some incredible things. I can't say which ones, but that took up the last couple weeks. I've gone on long walks every day. And I will say, for anyone who wants to know what I'm reading, it's the only reason I use Goodreads, and I update it religiously because it's the only way I can keep track of everything I read. So I'm trying to read 125 books this year because there's so many good books and there's just not enough time. So I'm trying to make the time.
And listening to audiobooks is just so nice and refreshing to be told a story.
Exactly.
Your audiobooks are really great too. I think I've listened to almost all of them. I'm gonna start.
Audiobooks are hard as the author though, because I kind of feel like my soul's trying to crawl out of my body because it's like a very weird thing. Like my audiobooks are amazing. Like as I can't listen to my own audiobooks.
I had to listen to my own for Tiny Pretty Things, and I was like, ooh. I was like, this is a mispronunciation. Oh no, I'm clicking this off. Like I can't listen to this. But I love your Darker Shade of Magic, especially books 2 and 3.
I don't know. They did that's a married couple who did the narration. And it's just beautiful. A good audiobook narrator, it is exactly as you said, Dhonielle. It's like being told a story.
I love it.
There are a lot of questions in regards to your prose writing and your process. And I think I could narrow them all down as to ask, you write brilliant prose, but how do you do it?
I have no idea. No. Okay, so no, I have no idea, but here's what I'll say. I genuinely don't know. My background is in poetry. Yeah. And I have a fixation with syllabolic rhythm and cadence. I always have. And when I set out to write my first novel, The Near Witch, it was very Machiavellian in that I knew I was probably never going to make it as a poet, but I knew I had a really strong understanding of rhythm. And so I thought, can I take everything that I love about poetry, the cadence, the meter, the way that you can create atmosphere out of the comma placement, out of the way that the sentences are shaped. The sentences from that book are, there are no strangers in the town of Near, and the wind on the moors is a tricky thing. 2 sentences that have a very, very like consistent rhythm. And so I started looking at, can I write prose that capture some of my favorite things about poetry and uses that to sculpt atmosphere. And it was probably the reason that I found my first agent, was that it stood out. Which is not to say the first book that got me an agent did not sell. It had no plot. Let's not mince words. But I think it's part of finding your voice. And for me, voice has always come hand in hand with the actual way that the story is told. And I know that seems simplistic, but there are a lot of writers out there who care about the story and don't really care about the way it's told. It's very utilitarian.
And that's not the way that I like to read. I come to your books for a particular voice. And I don't think you've realized that like each one of your books has a different rhythm. And when you brought up rhythm and like music, like each one of them, Shades of Magic has a very particular rhythm of sentence and movement that goes with action. Dark Duet and Savage Song have there's like an elegiac quality.
Yeah, Ambitious is staccato.
Yep.
But you're right. I don't think people understand, like, it's done totally intentionally. And something that's interesting about Addie is that I see people talk about it as a positive and as a negative, which is that there's a repetition. There's a repetition that's happening in Addie because on like a meta level, she's retelling this narrative to herself over and over and over again. And I wanted to have that kind of sense of echo. And so the cadence and the linguistic decisions that I made for Addie, as compared to my next book, which is a weird, dark fairy tale that's like Secret Garden meets Crimson Peak, like very different back to the fairy tale origins. And so, yeah, I think some of it is figuring out that voice and narration is its own element to the story. It's not the same as the story. It can be another character.
And that atmosphere to me is super important. It's why I go to certain writers. I go to you, I go to Holly Black, who's also atmospheric, where the book is an experience. You lead us into a dark wood, and that wood sounds very different when we're in Addie's wood versus in Shades of Magic versus in your middle grade. And it's very fascinating to see how you play with language to create mood and atmosphere and sort of surround us by it. I love it. You know, I love it.
I think we only have time for one last question. I'm trying to find it through the list of over 100 questions. Thanks everybody for asking them. But it was in regards to, I wish I could find their name. They asked how you feel when people say that a book has changed your life. Or changed their life, I should say.
Okay, and I want to hear Dhonielle's answer to this too. So here's what I'll say. I'll buy you a moment, Dee.
Yeah.
this is going to sound like a weird way to put this, which is that people often struggle with negative reviews. And the more books I've written, the less I've struggled with it. And that's not that I don't get negative reviews. I get a ton of negative reviews, but I don't struggle with it because something that I've had the fortune of realizing, thanks to the messages that I do get from readers, is that it's not about who doesn't connect with one of my stories. It's about who does. Because the thing is that reading is subjective, and that there will always be people out there that your story doesn't speak to. But the beautiful thing about that is there are thousands and thousands and thousands of books, and I'm sure that they can go and find one that does speak to them. That's the experience of reading. But when you find a reader who finds your work at the exact right time, and it's not just what they want, it's what they need, and they feel seen, and they feel held, and they feel buoyed, whatever it is that they feel, that is what you do it for. So there can be 1,000 people who said, no, this wasn't my bag. And that's fine, because they'll find another bag. But if there's a person who finds my work and needed it, that's everything. That's why I do it.
It fuels you, right? When I think about it from a librarian, I was a librarian for many years. Every book has its reader. And all I need is one reader to be like, this was everything to me. And that reader, I can remember the books that profoundly haunt me, that are, I see the cover and I remember the visceral experience, like Catherine Patterson's Bridge to Terabithia. I remember being in 4th grade and I remember reading that book and I remember having a meltdown. And that's when I felt the profound experience that fiction and story can do to you. And I just feel like when someone says your book changed my life, I am always like, thank you for giving me a gift. To just you reading me is a gift enough. And so even when someone hates my work, there are so many, you're like, right. Thank you for giving it a shot. However, there are so many that can get that hot flash of like narrative possibility that the bad reviews are like, it's fine. Someone sees me, someone sees you, someone loves your work. And that's enough. One person is enough. And you have me.
Exactly. Exactly.
Victoria, Dhonielle, thank you both so much for being here for the Morristown Festival of Books. I will leave it to you to end things.
Yes, and thank you so much for letting me interview and chat with one of my very best friends. I miss her dearly, and I cannot wait for coronavirus to be over because I will be there with
Dhonielle is so busy that this is literally the only way I've managed to snag an hour of her time in the last week. So thank you. And I just want to say thank you, Dee, for this. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. This has just been a highlight on my Sunday night, and it's a gift. And I know everything is difficult, and virtual is not everyone's ideal space, but right now it's an incredible luxury to have, to be able to spend time with friends and with readers and with this community.
Yes. And thank you so much for writing these books. And I will text you, my beloved. Thanks so much, Morristown. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Good night.
Thank you both. Victoria, also thank you for joining us from France. If you guys are both game, we should do this from either Red London or Gray London next time. If you guys
count me in. Red London, please.
Yes, please.
Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon and being a part of this virtual festival that we had in February. Please support all these authors by purchasing their books at our official bookseller, Bookends, which is linked on our website. I know they would appreciate it. There's also a lot of great stuff out there you can tap into. You'll all be receiving an email within a week with a link to this talk you just saw. It'll be unique to you and allow you to revisit this engaging conversation. On behalf of the Morristown Festival of Books, again, I want to thank Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, the Community Foundation of New Jersey, Delta Dental, Investors Bank, Morris Arts, Red Hook Management Investor Advisors, and the William E. Simon Foundation for their festival partnership. Thank you again, and remember to save the date for the Fall Festival, October 8th and 9th, 20 and 21. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much.